Amen. How many of you came from a non-Christian upbringing? Put your hands in the air. Quite a few of us in here. Probably about half of us in here came from a non-Christian upbringing. I myself was not raised in a Christian household. I was raised in a household that I guess was agnostic towards God. That kind of maybe there's a God out there, but we didn't kind of pray to him or worship him. We certainly didn't attend church unless it was a funeral or wedding or a christening. And so I was raised in a household that really didn't talk or discuss the things of God. But I can remember at the age of 16, I was out on a football field. And just as the sun was setting, and as we were finishing off the game of football, I began to look up at the starry night sky. And it just dawned on me at that moment, where did all of these stars come from? It's a very simple yet profound question. Why are they here? Who put them there? Did anybody put them there? How long have they been there twinkling? And as I just began to think about this question and these questions that were arising in my mind and my heart, I came to the conclusion at the young age of 16 that there surely must be a God behind this creation. And today, I've decided to present a talk that I've entitled, How to Prove the Existence of God to Anyone Willing to Use Their Brain. Now, if people are not willing to use their brain, of course, you cannot prove the existence of God to them. It's impossible. If somebody has made up their mind, they've dug their heels in, I'm not going to believe in God, and no matter how much evidence you present, I'm going to hold to my position, they're not going to budge. You're not going to be able to convince them. But if they are a sincere seeker, if they really do want to know and understand truth, if they have an open heart, then I believe it is possible to prove the existence of God. Amen? Amen. To do this, I'm going to present 3 reasons in favour of God's existence that I believe, when brought together as a cumulative case for the Creator, will prove his existence beyond reasonable doubt. By reasonable doubt, I mean doubt that's reasonable, not unreasonable doubt. This week, I've had the privilege of speaking to many people on social media about this event, many atheists who got very upset about the fact that I was advertising this event. And as the conversations went on, they began to become very unreasonable. They switched off their brains and switched on their emotions. And so it got to the point with many of them where I was unable to convince them because they were no longer using their intellect, no longer using their logic or reason. They were arguing from a point of fact or point of view where they quite simply did not want to believe in God. And that was the basis and entirety of their whole argument. Well, today I'm going to offer 3 reasons, and the first reason is the creation of the universe. Have you ever asked the question, why is there something rather than nothing? After all, we don't need to be here, do we? Why is there a sun, moon, and stars? Why is the planet Earth here? Why are we upon it? Why are we able to ask the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Have naturalistic forces created existence from absolutely nothing? Or are there supernatural forces at work? Well, I'm glad to say and be able to state this morning, standing before you, that there is now a large movement within the scientific community towards faith and belief in God. Every day, more and more scientists are coming to the belief that there is a God behind creation. And they've come to this belief because of where science is pointing them. For instance, Robert Jastrow, who's an astronomer and physicist and founder of the NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies, says this: astronomers have now find they have painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in the cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I, or anyone would call, supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Now, I want you just to meditate upon those words of a NASA scientist coming out and saying that it is now amongst the scientific community a proven fact that there are supernatural forces at work. And we shouldn't be surprised at this as Bible-believing Christians, for the Apostle Paul said this: "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." Look at what the Holy Bible says. There is enough evidence for the existence of God within creation, within planet Earth, stars, galaxies, planets, the sun, the moon, the creation of the cosmos. The Holy Bible says that there is enough evidence for the existence of God within creation to make every single person on this planet, close to 7 billion people, without excuse concerning the existence of God. It's just whether we choose, as human beings, to switch on our brains or not, to look at the evidence and to weigh this evidence for ourselves. Now, science itself cannot prove anything, for science is just the study of how things are. For instance, you can look underneath the bonnet of a Ford motor car, and you can discover how a car works. But that doesn't prove anything concerning its maker. It certainly points to design, and therefore there must be a designer, but you have to look beyond the design of the motor car to work out who the designer is, namely Henry Ford. In the same way, science doesn't tell us whether there is a God or whether there isn't a God. Science just discovers how the world works. But when we discover how the world works, then we can introduce disciplines such as philosophy, logic, reason, mathematics, to work out probabilities as to whether this creation came about from nothing, from chance, or from design. And if we're going to begin with the discipline of philosophy, there's a simple argument that I recommend every Christian should memorize off pat. It's an argument that's been around for hundreds of years, and it's been made popular recently by a philosopher named William Lane Craig. And this argument is called the Kalam cosmological argument. Everyone say Kalam. Cosmological argument. And here it is. It's incredibly simple, but is incredibly devastating to arguments put forward by the new atheists. Premise 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2. The universe began to exist. Scientists tell us it began to exist roughly 13.8 billion years ago. No matter the date, science now confirms the universe began to exist. And therefore the conclusion naturally follows from the two premises, therefore the universe has a cause. Could I see by a show of hands anybody in here who's ever witnessed something coming into being without a cause? Can I just see a show of hands? Not a single hand has gone up. And the reason for that is logic and reason and personal experience reveals to us that nothing can just spring into existence uncaused out of nothing. There is always a cause to whatever artifact is brought into existence. The planet Earth has a cause. You have a cause. The shoes that you're wearing, they have a cause. Somebody designed them. Somebody made them. So if everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, then the universe of stars, galaxies, planets, solar systems, it all boils down to a cause that existed prior to the universe, roughly 13.8 billion years ago. Now, there are three probable causes of the universe, and there's only three. If you can think of a fourth cause to the universe, please be sure to let me know. But I've been thinking this through my entire Christian life, and philosophers for centuries have been thinking this through as well. And these are the three causes that can bring a universe, or could potentially bring a universe into being. And as you're going to see, only one of them really does any justice to reason and logic. Cause number one, nothing produced the universe. Nothing was the cause of the universe. And nothing means no thing. It is the absence of everything, including potentiality. So nothingness doesn't even have the potential to create anything. But that's one of the arguments put forward by the atheists. Nothing created the universe. Maybe you've read the works of people like Stephen Hawking or physicist Lawrence Krauss, and you'll read in their works that they can now prove mathematically that the universe sprang into existence from nothing. And to the common layman, that seems it doesn't make sense. But the common layman will just jump on the bandwagon because Stephen Hawking and Lawrence Krauss must know what they're talking about. However, what the common layman doesn't understand is this. When physicists talk of nothing, they're not talking about no thing. It gets very confusing. When physicists talk about nothing, what they're really describing is the early state of the universe in the quantum vacuum being acted upon by the laws of nature, the laws of physics. That's what Stephen Hawking and Lawrence Krauss mean when they say the universe can come from nothing. The universe sprang into existence from the quantum vacuum, which is the sea of swirling energy being acted upon by the laws of nature. But where did the quantum vacuum come from? Where did the laws of nature come from? You see, nothing always produces nothing. The second opportunity is something infinitely regressive into the past, such as the chicken and the egg scenario. Which came first, the chicken and the egg? Well, the chicken did. Where did the chicken come from? It must have come from an egg. Where did the egg come from? Chicken. And it infinitely regresses into the past, so there's absolutely no starting point. Now, the problem with number two is that actual infinites do not exist. Potential infinites do. So there are potentially an infinite number of days ahead of us, but we will never actually reach a complete infinite set of days. Actual infinites do not really exist. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, just for fun, you have an infinite set of dominoes. And on these dominoes are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way on into infinity. You have an infinite set of dominoes. But let's say one day you get a little bit bored and you want to mix things up a little bit. So you decide to subtract all of the odd-numbered dominoes from your infinite set. How many dominoes have you subtracted? An infinite amount. How many dominoes do you have left? An infinite amount. You start off with an infinite set. You deduct an infinite amount, and how much are you left with? Still an infinite amount. So infinity minus infinity equals infinity. Let's say on another day you get bored again, you want to mix things up a little bit. So this time you decide to subtract every domino marked 100 or over. How many dominoes have you subtracted? An infinite amount. How many did you begin with? An infinite amount. So you've subtracted an infinite amount from an infinite amount and you're left with 99 dominoes. So infinity minus infinity equals 99. Hold on a second. I thought infinity minus infinity was infinity. Well, infinity doesn't really exist. And so we know that in time past, there cannot be an infinite amount of days leading up to today. There can neither be a multiverse of infinite universes, which eventually produced our universe 13.8 billion years ago. The buck has to stop somewhere. Imagine somebody has cleverly lined up all of these dominoes in a row, this infinite set of dominoes, and they snake and swerve off into the distance. You're standing next to these dominoes all lined up, and you want to get to the beginning of these dominoes to knock the first one down so you can see them all being knocked down in a row. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But how do you get to the very first domino when it infinitely stretches off into either distance? You see, if there's no starting point, you cannot get started. But we know that the universe got started. The multiverse, if it exists, got started. So the buck stops somewhere. There is a first primitive cause to all things. And that leads us to our third and only option. Something eternal with the ability to create produced the universe. By eternal, I don't mean something that's existed for a long, long time. By eternal, I mean something that has existed timelessly. As Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's great detective Sherlock Holmes states, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And cosmologists and scientists agree upon this fact, that in the creation of the Big Bang, 4 things came into being. The first is space. The second is time. The third is energy, and shortly after energy, matter. Space, time, energy, and matter were brought into existence at the moment of the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, which means prior to the Big Bang, there was no space, there was no time, there was no energy, and there was no matter. If there's no time prior to the Big Bang, then you have eternity. This is exactly what philosophy, mathematics, and science now agree upon. The cause of our universe is eternal. So let's extend the Kalam cosmological argument. Premise 1. The cause existed prior to creation. Premise 2. Space, time, energy, and matter were brought into being at creation. Therefore, the conclusion logically follows. Therefore, the cause was, number 1, omnipresent, because there was no space. Whatever the cause was, filled everything. There was no space to fill, in fact. All that there was the cause. It's omnipresent. Number 2, omniscient. All of the knowledge that could ever exist and has been fed into this universe existed causally prior to the Big Bang. All of the knowledge existed in an omnipresent state and an omniscient state. The third thing is it was omnipotent. All of the energy that existed prior to the Big Bang in an omnipresent and omnipotent state. The fourth thing, it was eternal because there was no time. The fifth thing, it was immaterial because there was no matter. The sixth is that the cause had to be creative. Otherwise, the creation would never have got started in the first place. And seventh, it needed to be a free will agent. Because when you have no time, you have no thought process, and you have no mobility or movement. You have a state of immobility, a state where rational thought cannot be delved out in a progressive fashion because there's no time. If you've ever watched a movie, and as you're watching the movie, you've pressed the pause button, you have paused time on that film. And what happens to the characters on the film? They freeze. So prior to the existence of time, there was an eternal state in which all of these 7 attributes existed timelessly. And unless those attributes and that cause had the ability to make a decision, time could never have got started and creation would never have occurred. Part 3. Premise 1. The cause of the universe possesses 7 unique attributes. Premise 2. Only the Judeo-Christian God possesses these 7 unique attributes. And you can study the religions of the world. There's really only 2 ancient religions that go all the way back that we can look at, and that's Hinduism and Judaism. They go back thousands of years. Unfortunately, Hinduism does not believe what modern science has discovered. So only the Judeo-Christian God fits into the mold of these 7 attributes. Conclusion, therefore, the Judeo-Christian God exists. Now, this argument is airtight. If you can think of anything wrong with any of these 6 premises that have been put forward, then you can argue against the existence of the Judeo-Christian God. But I think you're going to be unable to argue against these premises because more intelligent people than you and I have come across this, and they've come to the conclusion, hey, the Judeo-Christian God must exist. For instance, Gottfried Leibniz, mathematician and philosopher, says this: the ultimate reason of things must lie in a necessary substance, in which the differentiation of the changes only exists eminently as in their source. And this is what we call God. Henry F. Schaeffer III, quantum chemist, 5 times nominee for the Nobel Prize, says this: a creator must exist. The Big Bang ripples and subsequent scientific findings are clearly pointing to an ex nihilo creation consistent with the first few verses of the book of Genesis. These are top scientists saying this. Christian and Finson, winner of the 1972 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, says this: I think only an idiot can be an atheist. We must admit that there exists an incomprehensible power or force with limitless foresight and knowledge that started the whole universe going in the first place. Reason 2, the fine-tuning of the universe. Did you know the universe is set on a razor's edge of existence? It sits precariously atop the forces of nature. And the constants and the variables of these forces are so finely balanced, so precisely tuned, so as to put chance completely out of the question. A celebrated Cambridge astrophysicist, Sir Fred Hoyle, explains: a common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. So what do we mean when we say that the universe is finely tuned for existence? When the laws of nature are expressed as mathematical equations and simulations are run on these mathematical equations, we discover that our universe could only exist within a vanishingly small parameter of possible variables. Here are some of the finely tuned forces that we find in nature. And these are only some. There's about 50 or so that are in existence, or that scientists, cosmologists, and physicists have found. About 50. Here are 7. Now, to put these numbers into perspective, let me give you a few examples. There are roughly 1 in 10 to the power of 17 seconds in the history of the universe. And that's a history of 13.8 billion years. Only 1 in 10 to the power of 17 seconds in the history of a 13.8 billion year old universe. 1 in 10 to the power of 17. There are roughly 1 in 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the entire observable universe. 1 in 10 to the power of 80. So now let's look at some of the fine-tuning required just for you and me to be here today listening to this talk. And it is incomprehensibly small. The ratio of electrons to protons is 1 in 10 to the power of 37. It is insanely small. We cannot fathom that. The ratio of the electromagnetic force to gravity is 1 in 10 to the power of 40. The expansion rate of the universe is 1 in 10 to the power of 55. The mass density of the universe is 1 in 10 to the power of 59. The strength of the weak force within atoms is 1 in 10 to the power of 100. The cosmological constant, which is the expanding force behind the expansion of the universe, is 1 in 10 to the power of 120. And the low entropy of the early universe is 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. These are only 7 of the 50 constants out there that physicists have discovered. And remember, to work out the probability and the odds of the fine-tuning of the universe, you don't add these numbers together. You multiply each number by the very next number. So 1 in 10 to the power of 37 multiplied by 1 in 10 to the power of 40 multiplied by 1 in 10 to the power of 55. And when you look at the list of these 50 constants and variables within the laws of nature and physics, you come to the conclusion that this universe is on a razor's edge, and a razor's edge as a descriptive analogy is not good enough. The universe is just about to topple either way if one of these forces changes a fraction. This is what we talk about when we say that the universe is finely tuned. So how did the universe become so finely tuned for existence and for life? Well, we have 3 options. Physical necessity. The universe had to be this way. It needed to be this way. Option 2, chance. Option 3, design. Let's look at number 1, physical necessity. The universe needed to be this way. But did it need to be this way? The laws of physics could have been any number of ways. The variables could have shifted and changed. There could have been a completely different universe or no universe at all. So why are the numbers so finely tuned for existence? It's interesting that of all of these options, Stephen Hawking takes the first one. The universe just had to be this way. He's trying to avoid the God conclusion. The universe just had to be this way. However, John Lennox, professor of mathematics at Oxford University, has something to say about this. What Hawking says in his book, The Grand Design, is the universe exists because it needed to exist. And because it needed to exist, it therefore created itself. His conclusion merely restates his premise, which means his argument is circular. Nonsense is nonsense, even when spoken by famous scientists. Stephen Hawking is talking nonsense when he believes the universe created itself because it needed to be created. It's the ultimate bootstrap trick, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. It's an impossibility. But can you see what lengths atheists will go to avoid the conclusion that God fine-tuned the universe? Well, what about the second option? Chance. Maybe it's just chance that the universe happened to be so finely tuned for existence and for life. Well, let me put this in terms that perhaps we can all understand. Maybe in the future there will be a world lottery. And every single person on the planet, 7 billion people, they get to buy a ticket. And at the end of the week, they roll the 7 billion balls around and your number comes out as the lottery winner. You celebrate and your family congratulates you as you roll in your newly found dough and cash. But the next week, you win again out of 7 billion people. The week after that, guess what? You win again. The week after that, you're right, you win again. And this continues 1,000 weeks in a row. There is more chance and probability of you winning a worldwide lottery 1,000 times in a row than for the fine-tuning of the universe to be exactly as it is. Isn't that incredible? Somebody else stated it this way. It's like sticking an inch target across the other side of the observable universe, 18 billion light years away, and taking a gun, and with your very first shot, you hit that target. That is how finely tuned and balanced our universe is, not just for life, but just existence. The universe wouldn't exist unless these laws of physics and nature were finely tuned to this incomprehensible, vanishingly small and precise degree. The third option we have is design. And when you combine this argument, the argument from the fine-tuning of the universe, with the Kalam cosmological arguments that we've looked at, the creation of the universe, it already forms a powerful, enormously powerful, airtight case for the existence of God. And you would have to be unreasonable at this point to say God doesn't exist. You'd have to be incredibly arrogant at this point to say God does not exist. Well, if you're going to say that God doesn't exist, please give me another option. You've either got nothing did it, or an infinite regress of things did it, but please give me another option. Because those other two options don't work. Professor Paul Davies, Professor of Theoretical Physics at Adelaide University, says this: the really amazing thing is not that life on Earth is balanced on a knife edge, but that the entire universe is balanced on a knife edge and would be total chaos if any of the natural constants were off even slightly. You see, even if you dismiss man as a chance happening, the fact remains that the universe seems unreasonably suited to the existence of life, almost contrived. You might say a put-up job. Our final reason today, reason number 3, biological complexity. Life is a mystery. After decades of research into the origin of life, biologists are no closer to discovering how life could have started on planet Earth by itself. With the invention of microscopes, ever increasingly powerful tools, we've been able to delve within the cell and look at the chemical factory that exists in there. You see, in the time of Charles Darwin, you could forgive people for being ignorant of the human cell. Back then, it was just thought of as being like a jelly-like substance. But now that we've delved into what cells look like, it is a mass production factory. that enables life to exist. Complexity so intricate that it would shock the common person in the streets. When I was first introduced to this complexity at the age of 17, when I was studying biology for my A-level studies, we began to look into the cell. And I asked my biology teacher, "Sir, do you really think that this life, that these cells could just appear from nothing, that they created themselves?" And even though my biology teacher was not a theist, he was not a believer in God, he turned around and at least he was honest with me. He said, "Paul, there's no chance. I do not believe that life or the cell could have started by chance." At that point, I quit A-level biology because I thought, what is the point of learning this stuff if I'm just going to be fed lies? When I asked him later, "Why do you teach it if you don't believe it?" his response was, "I have to. It's part of the syllabus." Isn't that a shame? That we have got teachers in school today teaching concepts in biology and physics that they don't even believe themselves because the government of this country and other countries are forcing them to teach it. Recently, former atheist Anthony Flew talked about his conversion to theism, and he gave the reason why he now believes in Almighty God. And what you need to understand with a professor like Anthony Flew is that all of his academic life, not only has he been an atheist, but he has been a vocal atheist, a promoter of atheism. He has debated many Christians and theists concerning the issue of whether God exists. And very recently, he has changed his mind, and all credit to him, because of the overwhelming evidence that is now facing the scientific community. And Anthony Flew said this: "It is, for example, impossible for evolution to account for the fact that one single cell can carry more data than all the volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica put together." Did you know that? Just one of the several trillion cells in your body contains more information than the entire Encyclopedia Britannica put together. One of the trillions of cells that you have. That should shock you. That should stun you as to how amazing you are. Now, I know some of you get up in the morning, look in the mirror, and you already know just how amazing you are. Boyd, for instance. Golden Adonis. But when you begin to realize this machine that we call a human body contains so much information, it's more powerful than any computer language written by Microsoft, Apple, whoever. The greatest supercomputer invented by intelligent human beings pales into insignificance compared to your body. You are fantastic. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And when the Bible says fearfully, it means it imposes fear upon you when you begin to consider how you are put together. It should shock and awe you. Anyway, let's get back. It now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument to design. Professor Werner Gett at the German Federal Institute for Physics and Technology adds the following remarks. We then examine a particular coding system in DNA. Remember, DNA is the instruction manual to make you look the way you look. And if any single one of those little branches that you see, the double helix there, if they get broken or misaligned or misshaped, that's what causes illness when you're born with a genetic illness. But all of the information that makes you who you are is already encoded within this DNA, within the cells of your body. When we examine a particular coding system in DNA and discover that universal information is conveyed within the genes, using this DNA evidence and scientific laws governing universal information as premises, we are able to develop sound logical deductions. This leads us to the following conclusion. The God of the Bible exists, and he is responsible for originating and embedding universal information into biological life. Professor John Lennox similarly concludes, we have only to see a few letters of the alphabet spelling our name in the sand to recognize at once the work of an intelligent agent. How much more likely, then, is the existence of an intelligent creator behind human DNA? The colossal biological database that contains no fewer than 3.5 billion letters, the longest word yet discovered. In every single one of the trillions of cells in your body, there is a 3.5 billion lettered database written in code just to make you who you are. Now, when you times 3.5 billion by several trillion, what's the number? I'm lost too. But that's how much information you have in you just to keep you alive and keep you functioning every single day. Isn't God awesome? This complexity of biological mechanisms is further elaborated upon by Nobel laureate and organic chemist Christian Dudevay. He says this: if you equate the probability of the birth of a bacteria cell to chance assembly of its atoms, eternity will not suffice to produce a single one. You couldn't produce a single bacterial cell if you had all of eternity to do it by random chance. Faced with the enormous sum of lucky draws behind the success of the evolutionary game, one may legitimately wonder to what extent this success is actually written into the fabric of the universe. You see, the real challenge facing atheists today is to explain how vast amounts of required genetic information alongside biological machines needed to read and implement that information with the energy source required by those biological machines could have arisen by chance assembly at the same time in the same cell membrane to get life started. So in your minds, travel back, if you will, to the very first life on Earth. How did life get started? Well, first of all, you had to have a cell membrane. You had to have a wall to the cell already there. Then inside of the cell, you had to have the genetic coding already written. But how many of you, if you just leave a book on the bookshelf, it doesn't get read? Amen? So you need somebody to read the genetic information. And for that, there are these little things under a microscope just look like amazing surf boats. You know, just they got like a little rotor on the back and they zoom along with literally a motor. And there are these biological machines in the cell that go to the DNA double helix, unwind it, unravel it, read the genetic information, wind the DNA back up, then they go off to find all of the proteins and the things they need to build another cell. But to do this, they need an energy source, ATP. And you have to have the membrane, the coded information, the biological machines, and the energy source all in place at exactly the same time just to get one single cell living. let alone reproducing and then forming an animal and then forming human beings. I mean, the complexity is mind-boggling. And how on earth did natural forces create the first cell? How on this earth or in the universe could any of the forces of physics bring these four things together at exactly the right time? I don't know about you, but I have never come across a language that was not first inspired and authored by an intelligence. Can you think of any language in the universe that just popped into existence from nothing? Well, atheists say, well, DNA must have. It's craziness. It's unreasonable. It doesn't make logical or rational sense. Final thoughts. Obviously today, due to time restrictions, we've only been able to look briefly, and I do mean briefly, at 3 arguments that form a cumulative case for the existence of God. These arguments are backed up by the scientific community, philosophy, and mathematics. The arguments I presented are airtight, and please, if you can think of something wrong with them, please do be sure to ask me or tell me or send me an email, because I don't know of anybody who's been able yet to argue against these premises. And I believe that the creation of the universe, the fine-tuning of the laws of physics, and the complexity of biological life, when combined as a total case for the Creator, is unassailable. And anybody who uses their brain will have to come to the conclusion that there is a Creator behind creation. But of course, if somebody has made up their mind already not to believe in God, then nothing would ever convince them. I believe the conclusion is that there are supernatural forces behind the scenes, and that God, the eternal, uncaused, uncreated God of the Judeo-Christian scriptures, this God is the logical, uncaused, first cause of all existence. And now I close with the words of Professor Robert Jastrow, founder of NASA's Goddard Institute. This is an exceedingly strange development, unexpected by all but the theologians. They have always accepted the word of the Bible. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. But for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries.